Everything is set up in the form of a game. It's been going on for so long that we wouldn't even be able to comprehend.
Sarah Breskman Cosme, Master Hypnotist, Level 3 Practitioner of Dolores Cannon's QHHT, student of Dr. Brian Weiss.
This Earth decided that she wanted to experience the ascension process. An ascension process requires negativity. Some people come in to play the negative part.
These extraterrestrial beings crash landed onto the planet, and then what happened?
We are considered an experiment by the higher consciousness. Every human is apparently genetically modified, every single one.
Have you seen anything about future events on Earth?
Once we hit the nexus point, there are 3 timelines that shoot out. The upper timeline would be the one where the middle timeline goes, and that causes us to lose our planet. The lower timeline ends abruptly.
How can we make sure that we end up on the top timeline?
I'm always surprised at how many souls say they want the really difficult lifetime, because oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I just got into this journey by wanting to help myself, actually. So I had so many problems. I was overweight. I had phobias and fears and all kinds of issues when I was growing up. In order to counteract that, my parents put me in therapy. And so that was the only background I had, and I wanted to help people. So I actually had the dream of being a psychologist. When people ask me, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to be a psychologist to help people. But when I went to college, about 2.5 months after I got to college, my life was totally changed, because after 2.5 months, I went back to my parents' house. And for the first time, it was, I think, Thanksgiving break. And I walked through the door and I could see a reflection of myself in the mirror. And my jaw just dropped because I hadn't even realized it. But while I was away, I had lost a ton of weight, and I had literally so many things had changed. And I was just shocked because I hadn't changed my eating habits. I hadn't done anything differently, but my whole life was different. And I just stared at myself in the mirror, trying to figure out what I had done. And then it dawned on me, oh my gosh, I had changed my environment. And that caused me to change my thought patterns. And then I thought, oh my gosh, is everything based off of thought patterns? So I literally could change my whole life that way. And I realized, oh my gosh, I literally had forgotten to have my problems. And I never had those problems since, because now I understand that I can recreate or change my thought patterns if I want to change something about my physical body or something going on with my thoughts. So I decided that I was going to continue with psychology. I graduated, and then before going to graduate school, I had an internship where my job was to counsel people and to give them medication. So I had to do this before going to graduate school. But I felt as if within the first week of working there, that almost everything I had learned was a lie, because I never saw anyone get any better. And I couldn't believe it, actually. I thought, oh my gosh, this is the leading edge of thought. This is all we have to offer people with mental issues. And all it seemed that we were doing was to just medicate them. And then the counseling, just in my opinion, didn't seem to work. There needed to be a different element to it. So I quit. I didn't go to graduate school. I didn't become a psychologist. Instead, I got into hypnotherapy, and I wanted to become a hypnotist so that I could take people to the very root cause of their issues. Well, hypnotherapists, technically. So I wanted to take people to the very root cause of their issues, because I thought maybe then they could heal themselves. And in order to become a master hypnotherapist at the time, this was 2009, I had to lose weight, quit smoking, regular, childhood regression, and past life regression. I had to do it to become a master hypnotist. And this was really out of my comfort zone. And I didn't really want to do something like that because I thought it was too woo-woo. So I had to do a bunch of these hours to get my certifications. And it was obvious right away that there was something about the past life regressions that were working. I mean, people would come in for just one session and they would heal all of a sudden. And I thought, oh my gosh, like there's something about this that seems to work. I didn't know if I believed in it or not, but I decided I wanted to study with what I knew of as the best because I didn't have a lot of knowledge about anybody else doing these things. But I studied with Dr. Brian Weiss because I saw him on Oprah and I thought he must be very good. So I studied with him and he was my first teacher. And he taught me so many things about spirituality and about hypnosis. And I started going towards the way of past life regressions because it was so effective. And I loved it. I did his method for many years until I felt like something was missing. Like there must be something I'm missing here because I just felt like there must be more. And that's when I contacted a psychic and she said, oh, this is the easiest reading I've ever done because everyone has different future potentials. You know, they could go in this direction or that direction, but your future is just so clear. I mean, this is the easiest reading. You're supposed to do Dolores Cannon's method of hypnosis. You're going to be writing books. You'll be speaking about it all over the world. She said, you'll be teaching and just you'll be doing all these things. And I thought, oh my gosh, this reading is terrible. Like I thought she had me confused because I thought there was no way I would ever speak about things or write books. I'm not a writer. So I disregarded it. And it wasn't until many, many months later that I came across Dolores Cannon. But just like the psychic said, once I found her method and I studied it, I worked my way up from the bottom level to becoming a master in the field. And I even taught it with Dolores's daughter all over the world. And then I wrote my books and now that's what I'm doing. But the thing is funny to me is everybody talks about you have to create it in your mind. You have to manifest, focus on what it was that you wanted. In fact, people ask me, how did I get like this? Or how did I get that? I have never sought it out. It's always been seeking me. And I started to realize that we sort of like plan these things in our lives. If we feel like we intuitively feel, the universe helps us and keeps us in alignment. And then life becomes easier. I never tried to like write these books or I never tried to really get this information. So it's always interesting to me because I know when I'm really fighting to get something and it's such a struggle, sometimes that really isn't what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right. It's so interesting that you pointed out that you didn't try to manifest this or make this happen. It was seeking you.
I never, and I hear people talk about you have to create it in your mind, but I didn't create this at all.
Mhm.
I'm glad and happy that I'm doing this. It's amazing and fun. But yes, I never struggled or tried.
So I really want to get into the regression sessions that you've done where you've seen or your clients have seen the creation of our world and the creation of the human race. But before we go there, what's been one of the most memorable sessions that you've had?
Oh my gosh.
Do you like what you're hearing on this podcast? For just $10 a month, you can join Love Car Life Academy, where you'll have access to our exclusive community chat and our weekly live streams, where we answer your most pressing questions and deep dive into your spiritual practice. You don't have to be alone on this journey. Come join us. We would love to have you.
Well, I've had a lot of very, very memorable sessions. Let me think. I mean, I just love it when people heal themselves. I think to me that never gets old. I've seen people, actually when I first started, I saw somebody heal their back and they were not moving. That to me was really amazing because it just proved to me that there is this like higher force within all of us that can at any time heal us. And So the way the body seems to work is that it's just a messenger. It is sending us messages. And when we get the message and we understand what we have to learn from it, because usually there's a purpose behind the physical issue. So for her, I believe it was something like she felt unsupported. So she didn't have support in her life. And that's usually what happens. You have some issue with your back as a message. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that she needed to feel the support for herself, or she needed to be more supportive of herself and cultivate like more self-love. When she got the message, I then asked, well, can you heal her back? And they said yes. And I heard popping and she was staying still. So it's amazing what happens when we get the messages our bodies are sending us. A lot of times the healing can happen instantly. But as far as like metaphysical or really wild sessions, I have had beings come through my clients where they claim to be like more extraterrestrial or from a different realm. Sometimes they speak in different voices. My last book, Hypnotist Journey from the Trail to the Star People, was really incredible because I wasn't looking for this information, but my client under hypnosis, another sounding voice came through her. And it was a past life of hers, a Native American in the 1800s that wanted to share his firsthand perspective of walking the Trail of Tears. And when we researched this person, it was an actual person, and his name was Anawaya. And he wanted to share so much about our history and about his ancient history. As he said, the time was right to share this information. But I love finding out all this stuff because I'm really curious, and it helps me a lot to know all this information. And because it's so profound and helpful to me, I feel like nobody else would have access if I didn't share what I'm getting.
That's fascinating. Something that's really interested me about doing past life, not myself doing it, but reading the works of others who have done past life regressions, is the historical detail that you can learn about so many different places and time periods that's been completely lost to us now.
It's been so hidden too, and it's amazing. But even if you think about, if you were to quiet your mind and focus on an event that happened last week, the more you're quieting your mind and focusing on it, the more details you can start to remember that you've forgotten. And that's basically what people are doing. They can go into these other lives and see all the detail because hypnosis is just focused, deep concentration. And it's amazing. And that information is in everyone, in their subconscious memories. So there's so much of our history that's coming back. And I always feel like I'm a memory researcher, like of the subconscious, because there's so much information there.
Yeah. So when you regress your clients, are they like completely in a trance, like how Dolores Cannon did her regressions?
No, it's actually really interesting. When Dolores Cannon was doing her regressions, and when I started in 2009, the minds of our clients were different. Somewhere, yeah, it is really interesting because anybody that does this work that started even a decade ago would tell you that the minds of people have shifted. We are evolving. Humans are evolving, whether people know this or not. And what's really fascinating is when I first started, when Dolores was working, people would feel very unconscious in these deep states. They wouldn't remember anything. So when I would wake up my client, I would have to share what happened. We would give them a recording. I used to have the CDs that I would have to give them back in the day. And you would share, what happened because they wouldn't remember any of it. But around 2012-ish, all of a sudden there was some sort of a shift in consciousness. And what was happening was people could be in the same very deep states, but they were starting to feel more awake and aware. So with the higher self is the part of everyone that's universal consciousness. And it's the part that I speak to get my information, basically. The higher self said that what was happening was before there was a huge separation. So the person's conscious mind that we're using right now would be very separated from their higher self or their deep subconscious higher being that's within everyone. And you had to go very deep and not even remember anything because it was almost like less acceptable too. But ever since this shift, we've started merging with our higher self. So it can feel like your higher self is there. It's more present now. And that's actually very exciting. You can make changes quicker. You can heal yourself quicker. And it's also exciting because since also this information is starting to rise up, it's becoming more acceptable for our consciousness, which means we can go deeper into this information than we could before.
Wow, that is fascinating. Okay, so you have some videos on your YouTube channel where you actually share a regression session that you did. There's 3 parts to it. I was listening to that this morning. It's absolutely fascinating as this person is describing the creation of humanity, basically. And I would love to dive into that. So I guess let's start at the beginning because there's so many aspects of this we could talk about. Where did everything come from? Forget Earth for a minute. Where did the universe, the multiverse, whatever it is, where did that come from? Have you received information on that?
It's so mind-blowing because this universe that we're in right now, this is not the first time. This is like, we've had many universes that have been here. This is not the first one, it seems, according to my clients under hypnosis. And the way they describe the universe, so I'll back up and I'll tell you how I got this information or a little bit about this session. This session I did in 2018 with my friend. Her name is Jen, and she didn't believe in any of this stuff. This is why I felt like her session I was able to validate it for myself and believe it because I knew her. And I had been friends with her for over 10 years. So I knew she didn't believe in extraterrestrials and she didn't have any conscious knowledge. Like she didn't read, Dolores Cannon's books. She was like a perfect hypnosis subject for this type of work, in my opinion. Because if I had used somebody that had already read this stuff or heard it, I would have thought maybe it was seeping into her session. She didn't know this stuff. When we decided to first work together was because she had a physical issue. And she had this brain condition called pseudotumor cerebri. And basically what it was this flooding of her spinal fluid in her brain. And it was causing her to lose vision out of her left eye. And her doctors said there was a huge risk of a stroke. So she definitely wanted to do a session with me because she wanted to heal herself. That was her motivating factor, not to learn about any of this stuff. In our first session, she regressed to these ancient civilizations, Lemuria and Atlantis. And that's how I wrote my first book, A Hypnotist's Journey to Atlantis. In our second session, basically these are the second sessions or the sessions after that I posted on my YouTube video because I feel like people can get a lot from this and really dissect it if they wanted to. Our second session, I asked her higher self to take us to the beginning of this story that, we were supposed to uncover for the world because we found out in her first session that we had planned to meet together and uncover this information that was hidden in the subconscious of everyone. And that the world had been waiting for it, is what they said. They said the world had been waiting for this. It had been hidden because the evolution of our consciousness hadn't reached a point where it was acceptable, basically. After that session, she healed herself. So she healed herself and went back to her team of specialists, and they said, oh my gosh, it's amazing. So that's why we decided to work together again, because we thought there must be something to this. In her second session, she remembered being like what you would consider an extraterrestrial. People have many different names for the beings, but she considered herself to be an extraterrestrial who was basically crash landing on Earth for the first time. And she describes what it's like. Like, it was really fascinating. I mean, her details are amazing. she realized that she was the commander and came from this place in the Pleiadian star system, and they were running out of resources. So they needed these resources to create like almost like a new realm, like a new reality. And each person had to go in. And when you would go in, it would shock you into enlightenment. You would understand the history and you would understand information about the universe and what the universe really was. So she went through that realm that they created with these minerals, and she realized that the truth of the universe, which is really interesting, is that everything is set in a figure 8 pattern. So it's like the universe self-corrects itself. So it's in a figure 8 pattern and there's no end and no beginning, but it's just constantly moving in this pattern. And so what they realize when they go into this and they've downloaded the information about what life really is that everything is set up in the form of a game. And this game had no end and no beginning, but it's been going on for so long that we wouldn't even be able to comprehend, like in the aspect of time, because it consecutively happens. And every person that you meet is part of this ancient group, everyone. And we've all traveled and done, like, we've all gone to many different universes, if you want to call them that. We've all done this over and over again. And what we're doing is we're expanding our soul and we're learning about ourselves. So everything is like a reflection of everything else. So our job is to learn about ourselves as a physical human, to learn as much as we can and become a spiritual master of ourselves. And we're also experiencing being with other people and experiencing this life and this reality. And we've done this and we're doing it consecutively on many different levels. On some level, we were either kicked out of something, we were like, exiled or something, and there was a need for something, is how she described it. But we used to all have like energy bodies and look kind of more colorful, like wispy energy bodies. And essentially, because the creation could happen with our minds, we were that powerful. That's essentially how she described it starting, if that makes sense.
Are you speaking of the creation of everything or just specifically of the beings who came to Earth?
The creation of the beings who came, not really, it's more than that, because it's like the beginning of this experiment. So I believe from my clients in hypnosis, each universe has different laws and a different agenda.
Right.
The universe, like, so this one right now, has an agenda, and that's the birth of that one. Was out of need. But it encompasses like other realms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just to clarify, what you're saying is like this universe was created for a certain purpose. Yeah. And then there's other universes that exist simultaneously. It's all boggles the mind, but they have their own reason for being created or coming into being. So I remember listening to what she said. It sounded like there was a group of beings, I think she said 6 to 10, who weren't supported in some way. And she said they had an emptiness inside that they wanted to fill. And then that's what they created this universe for.
We are those beings because we are deep down, you reach universal consciousness, and it's the higher self that comes through each person. So yes, she said it started out of like a lack, out of need, out of a loss.
So beyond all of that, is there a source from which everything originated?
So apparently there is, according to my clients under hypnosis, there's one source, which is everything, which is us. And that fractions itself off into many different splinters, universes. When people are looking in the in-between, and they're in the in-between after they've completed a life, that's one of the things they're first shocked about. They can't believe how vast it is. So there's so many different places.
Right. And so this specific universe that we are in was created by this group to fulfill some kind of need. Does this universe have a theme? Like, for instance, like awakening or spiritual evolution? I've often wondered if this idea of spiritual evolution is actually just a story that we're playing out for some reason.
It is. Okay, so if you go back to when, at one time on this Earth, planet, realm, whatever you want to call it, the beings were like more of like an eighth dimensional society where there were like, creatures almost like fairy creatures. People were just so full of joy and play and bliss and very in tune with the earth. It's back in the time when people used to change their hair color and eye color according to the seasons. And actually that's if you have like freckles or your eye colors change or hair colors change, it's usually a sign that you're very in tune with the earth and that you can connect with her very deeply. But we used to have a deeper connection. But the earth itself, so the earth is just part of many different earth planets, and they kind of move in a trajectory. This earth decided that she wanted to experience the ascension process and put out a call. When she did so, it allowed for a little bit of negativity to come, because I know this is going to sound crazy, but an ascension process requires negativity. So negativity was able to come to this planetary sphere in order to allow for the growth. Then came the pyramid structures and things that would assist in the ascension process. So this earth is on an ascension process. The souls that come to grow, to learn here, come with the understanding that they will be part of the ascension process. People come in with many different roles, though. Some people come in to play the negative part because the negative part is needed here. If you don't have negativity, you just unfortunately don't grow. And so that's part of the plan for this earth. Now, if you zoom out and look from a different perspective, there's another plan for this whole thing that's happening. On another level, us as higher level beings, we are trying to evolve to another place in our evolution, but we're having a hard time doing that. And we need to create an experiment to learn how we can do that. So us also, the people that we are right now in this physical body, we're playing out how a group can expand their consciousness. And there are many beings watching us at all times. We're being watched to see how a human being can go from being very, very low in its density to go up higher and to evolve and to expand their consciousness and be part of this ascension process. There's a great many, if you want to call them beings or other levels of us that are learning from us here. So we are considered an experiment by the higher consciousness, but we're also the ones doing the experiment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So the 6 to 10 beings that created this universe out of like some kind of need, were those beings in physical form, like extraterrestrials in physical form doing this, or were they in spirit form?
They seemed, according to her, to be in spirit form. They seemed to have like no outline to their bodies, basically. They're just like spirit, if you will, like what you would consider like a god.
Because the reason I was asking is because then it makes me wonder if we're also evolving outside of our bodies as well. Like if we continue evolving as spiritual beings.
Right. I bet. Because when people go to the in-between, they realize like how much soul expansion they have and they want that. I mean, I'm always surprised at how many souls say they want the really difficult lifetime because their soul expands so much from that difficult lifetime. And so we must be like expanding ourselves. It's such a great concept, like to think about. Wonder how my soul is doing today.
Right? Okay, so were you ever shown or given a timeline on when humans were created on the earth?
No, not really, because it seemed like the timeline changes. Even when I looked into the fall of Atlantis or the fall of Lemuria, the times would sometimes shift. And what I understand from that right now is that how the higher consciousness describes it is each person has a bubble of their own reality. So you literally create your own reality. It's like you have this bubble, almost like a spaceship, and that's yours. But other people can sometimes influence yours, but ultimately it's what you believe. It's all about your belief system. So your timeline might be different. It's almost like the Mandela effect, because I remember when he died in prison, and I remember the big AV TV that came in with the student, and we watched it. But other people have a different memory of this time. And so I believe everybody has like their own timelines, and they shift and change and bump up against each other. Also, there are beings that seem to freeze time sometimes and change things in the past, which is really wild, because there's beings that are overseeing this experiment too. And sometimes things have to be shifted and changed. It's really interesting.
That's crazy, but it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that.
Sometimes they have said that they've frozen time and cleaned up our oceans a little bit.
Really?
Yeah. And then move things, or they work on the soil sometimes, but they do it in a way where no one would ever suspect it and where no one would be able to remember.
It's interesting that you mentioned those two things, because those are two things that I'm personally very interested in and passionate about. And the oceans, I've heard that like basically the oceans are the heart of the planet, and specifically some of the animals that live there, like the whales. Like if the whales were to go, the whole planet would go. That's how interconnected we are with everything.
That is such a good point that you brought up. Whales and even dolphins, they are so wise, and their sounds can actually heal you if you're around them. I think people underestimate how powerful it can be to be in the ocean,
Yeah.
because these frequencies are actually affecting you when you're in the saltwater. So sometimes the higher self will say one of the best things a person could do would be to go into the ocean or just to be around dolphins. The frequency of the noises they make is so healing.
Right, exactly. And the ocean, all of life originated in the ocean.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, we're so lucky to have whales, and these big sea creatures, because there are dolphins and whales and other realms that, we can access sometimes in these sessions. There's so much to learn.
Okay, so let's get into the details of how the human race was created. So these extraterrestrial beings crash landed onto the planet, and then what happened?
So this is according to my friend who didn't believe in any of this stuff. So she wouldn't have known any of this. So what she saw was that they were extraterrestrials that crash landed on the planet, and they were cold and freezing, and they came across like a human beings. And the human beings were shocked to see them because they had never seen anything like an extraterrestrial before. These human beings were very early man. It's funny how she described them just as like hair all over, not really, not a human being like we are now. Every human is apparently genetically modified, every single one. The very early humans, some higher selves say that those are the Sasquatch, that those are humans, but they've evolved differently. They weren't tampered or genetically manipulated, and they're more native to the earth than like the human being. The human being is just part extraterrestrial, basically. And so they realized that they had to seed this population. There were many reasons for that. They couldn't survive. They wanted to incarnate into the human being, but they couldn't do that with the way they were then because of their skin. It was too light. It wouldn't work for this type of radiation and the sunlight. So they needed to kind of create basically a physical vessel that they could inhabit. And they created these physical vessels basically by manipulating the DNA, which I found very fascinating because it was interesting to hear her say that evolution is a very powerful force and it happens on its own. But all that was done was a little manipulation, and they sped up the evolution. And it was really interesting that they would use a simple saline solution in order to bring some genetic materials. But essentially, that's how the experiment started, just manipulation. Otherwise, we would be more like Sasquatch.
Okay, so that is fascinating. And I've heard that from several different sources now,
Really? Wow.
that our DNA was manipulated to speed up the evolutionary process because how I've heard it before is that the whole Earth experiment was for the evolution of consciousness, and the early humans that were on the Earth at that time were they had developed to where they could use tools. They maybe had the beginnings of language. So they had the most potential to develop self-awareness and be able to evolve spiritually. The extraterrestrials manipulated the DNA to speed along that process.
The reason the human being is so important and different than, say, a different mammal is because of our capacity to have very strong emotions. Actually, emotions act as the gateway through the universe. So it's what really is a human being's superpower. And human beings throughout the rest of the universe, they're known to be the only being that has unlimited potential. So it's because of the belief system of the humans that they can basically do whatever they want if they could change their belief system, because a human being can go from so low to so high that they have unlimited potential, whereas a different design or a different being does not have unlimited potential, which I find very interesting. And you can use your emotions, as like these other beings say, to actually manifest. And the way you do that is to really delve into your emotion, focus on it. If you wanted to manifest something, they've said, you focus on the emotion and really feel it. Like an easy thing you could do is feel gratitude for like 5 minutes. When you're focusing and feeling a very strong emotion, it's opening up portals. There's portals of possibilities that open up because of you feeling that emotion. The same happens when you're focusing on a negative emotion, unfortunately. But you can actually manifest through the use of feeling emotions. And then you would visualize what you want to bring forward, because these higher selves are always saying that we don't understand the energetics of our humanness because we're not using emotion like they would if they were in our shoes.
Do you know what it is about the emotion that opens up those possibilities?
Tied to our creative force. So this is really interesting because they've shared that every cycle or this experiment always has two sides. Like one side evolves into a greater spiritual knowledge and it keeps ascending and it becomes like more in tune with nature. So it starts to use the elements, uses magic, uses like our energy centers and our emotions. But the other side likes to go further with their technology. There's always like two choices. And so they go very far with the technology and feel like they can't develop the technology within themselves. So it's easier to develop technology that will, alter their brain, or they could put like a link in their brain or become more robotic and cut out emotions and things like that. And what's really fascinating is it seems like throughout history, the side that always goes further with their technology seems to end in a downfall. But the side that goes really far with their spirituality oftentimes ascends to a different level. So it's just really interesting because we're at this crossroads right now where we have the two choices. And many people are starting to like realize that all this time they really just needed to go back to nature and back to themselves, like into their internal world. And when we do that, we realize how important our emotions are because other beings have cut them out. And that's, like if you think about it, I mean, it really sucks when you're feeling negative, or feeling like in a bad mood or something hurts. There's other races of beings and other versions of us that have cut those out because we didn't want to feel them. And that just led to their downfall, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes so much sense. Yeah, and I hear all the time that the way to, let's say, heal or reach enlightenment, for lack of a better word, is to embrace your entire spectrum of emotions, to just embrace it and let it be what it is.
Because emotions and like trauma or upsetting things are actually the opportunities that we have. So they're a chance for us to go deeper into them instead of trying to escape. It's like everything that we were taught when we were younger is just not really even true. Like we were always taught, no, do something else if you feel angry or do something else if you feel upset. When really we're supposed to go in and sit with ourselves and listen to ourselves and then move past it. And the emotion goes away on its own that way when we listen to it. It's like emotions are like children. I forget who said that. They don't shut up unless you listen to them.
Okay, so going back to the story, humanity was created, the human race, the DNA was modified. And how did this benefit the extraterrestrials? Like, what purpose did that serve for them?
Many different purposes. So one of the purposes was this experimentation because they had said on a different level, they couldn't evolve. Like they just were stagnant. So they needed to create this experiment in order to see how us in these really dense physical bodies would evolve. Another reason was that many wanted the experience of this 3D reality. So they would have to have bodies they could incarnate into.
Okay, so their spirits would would they go into another lifetime and incarnate as a human, or how would that work?
Yeah, there are many people that you probably meet all the time that have very strong connections to other realms or other places you would consider to be extraterrestrials. Mm-hmm. And they're like incarnating in a physical body.
Mm. Okay, so this race of extraterrestrials would have been what we would consider to be very advanced because, first of all, they have the knowledge of how to seed a planet. And secondly, they have an awareness of reincarnation and they're planning like for future lifetimes to come in and live as a human.
Yes, but in a sense, it is so confusing, but everything happens in the now moment too. So they're essentially like us on other levels. I mean, what I've noticed from my clients when they're under hypnosis is that when they have a lot of encounters with an extraterrestrial, most of the time that's them. It's just like a different version of themselves playing out now. So if you think about that, there's other versions of ourselves that are way more advanced.
So I would love to ask you have you seen anything about future events on Earth and what direction are we going with all the turmoil that's in the world right now?
Okay, so this is what I've heard is happening right now. When a poison is like leaving the body, all of a sudden the person looks like they're getting sicker. But actually the poison's leaving the body. Right now, what is happening is there's so much light coming to this realm from the central sun, coming up from the inner earth, and it's just flooding us with light, which is helping us. It's almost like a manipulation. It's pushing us in this ascension process. So there's a lot of chaos right now, a lot. Everyone's experiencing this, a lot of chaos. And what that's doing is shaking things up and it's bringing the poison to the surface. So a lot of people are experiencing like issues or physical issues or, negative things happening. And that's just pushing this poison up to the top so that it leaves the body and they become lighter in turn. So I've heard that is happening. I've also heard that everyone right now has many different timelines, but we're entering into what the higher self is considered to be a nexus point, and it's a merging of the timelines. So there may be, and it's a potential, just potential, an event that causes people to shift their perspective. So there's many different potentials for this. One potential that may or may not happen is if a comet goes in front of the sun and the tail triggers a solar flash by the movement, that will dismantle our veil. And if it does, everyone will see into all the realms at once, and they'll have a different idea of what is really happening. Because right now we have a veil that kind of shows us only what we can perceive with our filters. But if that's dismantled and we could see into many different dimensions, it will definitely shift the perspective of many people. And that would be the nexus point. Of course, it's just a potential. Once we hit the nexus point, then apparently there are 3 timelines that shoot out from that. The upper timeline would be the one where we really connect with the oceans and the earth, and we just move into this beautiful new society, and it's based on trade and love and things like that. I hope I'm there. But the middle timeline goes down the same trajectory as another version of us. People consider them the gray extraterrestrials, where we decide that it's a better idea to use implants in our brain that would help us basically become more robotic, get really advanced with AI to where we alter our DNA, and that causes us to lose our planet. And so essentially we would have to start this cycle over again and this experiment over again, because usually anything that alters your DNA and turns it more robotic ends in the civilization's downfall if there isn't a perfect merging with the two. So I'll get into that later, but that seems to be the challenge or the experiment or the game that a lot of us come in to play. But anyway, the middle timeline goes down that path. The lower timeline ends abruptly because those souls that want a very deep 3D experience would just be transferred to another 3D. You can't do this wrong. I mean, this is an experiment, an experience, and a game. You have plenty of time to keep trying. But the middle timeline, there's a lot of light workers that would be strategically placed there. And all they would do would be to shift the perspective of the people in the middle timeline and push them up to the top. Because all it is really a shift in perspective anyway. And so that's essentially what I've been hearing is like the future or the future timelines. I mean, we have so much help right now, and people are starting to reactivate their dormant DNA that hasn't been really online. But as we move into this phase of our ascension, where we're starting to reawaken this ancient knowledge within ourselves and reactivate our DNA, we start to realize how we are so in tune with the earth, and we're so in tune with magic and the elements. And we start to access that ancient knowledge. But the ancient knowledge has been very suppressed and hidden, but it's really reemerging in this time.
That is fascinating. There's so many directions we could go if we had more time. Are you familiar with Bashar?
Yes, I met him once. Yeah.
Well, don't quote me on this because I only heard him talk about it once. But didn't he say something about that Bashar is a future version of the human race that went too far in the direction of numbing their emotions?
Oh, interesting.
And then ended up losing the planet because of that. And so now they're trying to serve humanity by coming back in time or speaking back in time, however that works, to get us on track to a different track.
What my clients under hypnosis have said is they were able to use this technology where they were able to tether their universe to ours, even though they're a future version, and able to come in high jump into this universe. But they're using other DNA of themselves, which is us, because we're just another form of them, this future version, because they are humans that have altered themselves to get a really bad rap, but there are some really good ones that really do want to help humanity, and they really seem to be working with benevolent ETs.
Okay, so how can we make sure that we end up on the top timeline?
I think, honestly, it's really easy. If you learn, essentially, the only thing you have to do is learn from your experiences. And if you do inner work, if you really work on yourself and you try to process your feelings and anything, if you're doing anything for yourself, you're most likely on the higher timeline. If you don't want to grow, essentially, then you wouldn't grow. And that would be the distinction between the two. Sometimes people do come in to be on the middle timeline or the negative timeline because that's the choice, and they wanted to help people by serving in that way too.
So if you're somebody that came in on the middle timeline to serve, would you then shift up with humanity as well?
I'm sure you would. There's so many light workers that came just to assist in this ascension process, and they feel like their job or their role is to shift perspective. And that's really what they're doing. Even when they're at the grocery store and talking to someone will be affected by that. Or there's other races or beings of incarnated souls that are from, places where they've already done this ascension process. So they're carrying the knowledge from this ascended place. And even that energy and that frequency helps to shift. There's so much help right now, but it's uncomfortable. It's almost like wearing moldavite or something. It forces you to learn your lessons or forces you into alignment.
Yeah, 100%. I can see like the two timelines and the directions we could go, because I've been thinking about this for several weeks. I'm raising kids in this generation, and one thing that I've noticed a lot of is kids have access to technology. They have access to the internet. A lot of them are growing up addicted to smartphones, 4 or 5 years old. And now we've developed AI. And so I've been thinking a lot about when you're addicted to a screen and you give away your power to technology. Not that technology is bad, because it can be used responsibly, but if we're raising a generation of kids that is growing up addicted to screens and they're not having any space or silent time and being taught how to go within and ascend spiritually, then there is a possibility of us going that route with technology. So it's almost like we're at this point where we have these two paths, and what are we going to do with it? And it's very encouraging to hear what you and so many others are saying, that we have so much support and we have so much help. And I think that it's very possible that even with all the challenges that we are facing, that we will make responsible choices, and that these children, even though they're growing up with all the technology, a lot of them are so spiritually advanced and aware, and like you can just feel it in them. So it's exciting times. It's exciting times that we're living in.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes when you look at screens, it's actually helping you rewire your brain to teach your brain instant manifestation. So that's our realm is also headed towards a more easier manifestation realm. It's considered a manifestation planet now, actually, where we live.
Interesting.
So the younger generation, there's always like a good and a bad to everything. So the technology serves a very good purpose in some ways. But yes, like you said, if they don't have time to really go inwards and they don't have time to, quiet themselves, then you could see it moving in that direction.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for having this conversation. I would like to give you a chance to share with people where they can find you.
Thank you so much. You can go to my website, theholistichuhypnotist.com, and you can always check out my YouTube channel, Sarah Breskman Cosme Hypnosis. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok as well.
I'll have those links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.